Now, reports have said that President-elect Donald Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin, allegedly advising him not to escalate the conflict in Ukraine, emphasising Washington's strong military presence in Europe, and expressed interest in further discussions aimed at achieving peace on the continent. But the Kremlin has since denied that such a call took place. Well, of course they would. Now, it comes as Donald Trump's son, Donald Jr., as you can see on your screens, has caused something of a stir after sharing a video on Instagram, appearing to mock, well, it did mock President Zelensky for losing his allowance. There you go, look, you're 38 days from losing your allowance as the dollar bills float by, and President Zelensky looks suitably dischuffed. So what will this second Trump presidency mean for war in the Ukraine? Well, I'm joined in the studio by my panel. They're still here. They haven't had enough yet. Former spokesman for Reform UK, Gawain Towler, and GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. Nigel, I'm going to start with you this time. Isn't it astonishing that Donald Trump isn't even in the White House yet, and yet every single major political conversation on the planet seems to be marching to his drums?
Yep, and that's what's going to continue happening on the basis he's so damned unpredictable. And this is our problem. And the problem for the world is you just don't know whether he means what he says, whether he'll even do what he says. Now, when it comes to Ukraine, what he's promised is that he will end the war in 24 hours. Now his allies are getting on the media and saying, oh, no, that was just a campaign pledge. Don't take any notice of that. So we're even further away from knowing exactly what Trump will do. Now, what his son says is he's going to cut off the money to Ukraine. Now, the Americans have spent $100 billion so far on the Ukrainian war. We don't know if he'll do that either. So at the moment, there's no way of actually knowing which way he'll turn. Some of the indications from, say, his Vice President, J.D. Vance, are that they're prepared to give up Ukraine and see if they can end the war that way. I think
parts of Ukraine, not the entire country.
Well, we don't. Sorry, not Ukraine. I meant Crimea. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yes, I meant Crimea, not give up Ukraine. But I mean, the trouble is with Trump, you never know, and that's why the world is actually so jittery just at the moment, because we don't know.
But is that true? I mean, there were no wars when Trump was in power.
I think this is a myth. The idea with Trump, he's so you don't know what he's going to do. He says what he's going to do, and pretty much, during the last presidency, there were 8 foreign policy pledges. He carried out 7 of them.
So what will he do about Ukraine, then?
Against the will of states, against the will of the establishment, he did the classic one was moving the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Oh, not supposed to do that, but I made a promise. But everybody makes promises. You don't have to keep them. That's just to get elected. And so I think we have to take his word for it. And for many months, he has said he wants to stop the war.
Okay.
That's what he wants to do.
And what he hasn't said then is, we all want to stop the war. What he hasn't said is, well, I would like to see the war stop.
I would like to see the Ukrainian
victory.
But Ukraine is not likely to beat Russia.
No,
not in a war. It's not.
I would like to see Ukrainian victory.
Yeah, great. I would like to see the moon come down, be made of green cheese. But it's not going to happen.
But what Donald Trump
hasn't done,
he said, right, I'll end the war in a day. He's not told us once how he thinks he can do that.
Well, he's not in power yet. Perhaps that will come next. What we do know, the direction of travel, though, is that Donald Trump Jr. said there are no place in his father's administration for what he calls war hawks. This is Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley, 2 very pro-Ukraine former cabinet ministers in the first term, not given positions this term. So we are seeing a direction of travel that he'll make good for his word.
Yeah, but how? How do you actually end that war? If he intends to do that, I can understand he could cut off the money, in which case it would end in Ukraine's defeat. He can support Ukraine, in which case the war continues. What we don't know is there's no indication whatsoever of what he might do to go and deal with the situation.
What we don't know is the carry a big stick aspect. What is the big stick that Trump desires to use? Yes, OK, he's trying to he talks to Putin, as he should, as the next president of the US. He needs to be talking to that. There's no reason not to talk to your enemies if it means the likelihood of people stopping dying. That is a good thing. The question is, OK, they're talking about giving up Crimea. Crimea's gone.
Well,
it's gone. It's been gone since 2014 because the EU allowed it to. So, frankly, and so did the previous administration.
But there's no reason why you couldn't have it back.
Yes, there is.
That's one of the reasons.
There is thousands and thousands of Russian troops is the reason.
But we've seen what the Ukrainians have done. The Ukrainians have actually fought them back. They've even been able to go into Russia.
OK, gents, this is a heated conversation. Let's take it further now, because I'm joined by the former White House Chief of Staff under President Donald Trump, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, an absolute pleasure to have somebody of your stature on the show. Thank you very, very much for joining us. So the world is trying to second-guess Donald Trump. Is that wise? And what do you think that he will do? Because everybody's marching to his drums. He's not even in power yet.
So when you say, what did he do on Ukraine or on everything? I mean, where would you like me to start?
On Ukraine. Let's start with Ukraine, and then we'll get on to the world and everything else and sort that before the end of the show.
Yeah, I mean, here's what I'm hearing. Here's a fascinating conversation. I've traveled a lot in Europe. I've traveled around the world. Obviously, spent a lot of time here in the U.S. And I ask everybody the same thing, which is, how does this end? And there's a couple of possibilities, but the most likely, 95% out of 100, is that there's some ceding of some Ukrainian territory in exchange for some long-term security guarantees for Ukraine by the West. I think the only question is, does that happen sooner or later? The biggest difference in that timeline that comes out of the American election is that I think Trump will have much less patience than Kamala Harris would have, and that I think he's going to be pushing for an immediate cessation of hostilities under that sort of that rubric of exchanging security for land.
So, Mick, that will be a solution which won't please Volodymyr Zelensky, perhaps. That's a solution that won't please perhaps the European Union, the world leaders who seem to have taken his side. But I guess Donald Trump's going to do what? Say, well, that's your deal, take it or leave it?
Well, I mean, what do the European leaders want? I know what Zelensky wants, and I don't blame him. He wants all of his land back, including Crimea. I just don't ever see that happening. I don't think any sane European leader thinks that is actually going to happen here. I mean, again, someone made an earlier comment that Crimea has been gone since 2014 because Europe let it go, and that's exactly right. So I think that, again, I've talked to people privately, and they're like, well, the Donetsk is probably going away, but if we can give the Ukraine security, then maybe we get this war stopped. I think that's how it ends.
And Mick, there's been much talk about Donald Trump finally making European nations cough up the money they're due to pay into NATO. It's meant to be 2%. The UK honours that. Germany doesn't. Spain doesn't. France doesn't. Italy doesn't. Hardly any of them do. It might even go up to 3%. Is that the route forward? Donald Trump's going to say, why should I pay for your security? Cough up yourselves.
Oh, let's be perfectly clear. Yes, that's where it's not where he's going. That's where he is. This is his approach, and it's fairly common sense if you sort of take the hyperbolic language out of it. Here's the basic premise. Everybody needs to live up to their obligations. That's what it means to be allies and friends and partners. Okay, and yes, you want us to live up to Article 5. We agree with that. We're going to live up to our part of the agreement. Why don't you live up to yours? And the gentleman's agreement was 2% GDP. And I think him jawboning that issue has been helpful to Europe. I think you could make the argument that NATO is actually stronger at the end of the Trump first term than it was at the beginning of the Trump first term because of his insistence on participation by more countries to that 2% GDP level. Do I think it's going to 3%? Probably. What would the argument be? Well, look, obviously what's happened since I've left last time, this is Trump talking now, with Russia being a lot more aggressive, maybe 2% isn't enough. Maybe 3% is the number. We're doing it. Why can't you folks do it? I think that's a fair and reasonable conversation to have.
Mick, while I've got you, I have to ask you a quick question. Donald Trump, the first time round, was new to the job. Now he's going back in for a second term and he knows the system. Do you think we're going to see a much more radical version of Trumpism in the second session?
Radical is not the word I would use. Effective and efficient and quick. I just hung up with a conversation with some folks on the transition team, and the level of sophistication that they are bringing into this transition period is night and day different from what I saw in late 2016 after that election. I joined the cabinet. He asked me to join the cabinet in December of 2016. The way that they are laying out the premise for what they want to do now is so much more sophisticated. They know how government works. They're going to be moving much more quickly. Here's what I tell people. Whatever you liked about Donald Trump's first term, you're going to like more in the second. Whatever you didn't like about Donald Trump's first term, you're going to dislike more in the second. He's just going to be better at doing the things he wants to do because he's learned how the government works, and so is the team around him.
Absolutely fascinating insight. Thank you so much for joining us. Excellent. Former White House Chief of Staff under President Donald Trump, Mick Mulvaney. That was awesome.